For the past year or so, I've been compiling a shopping list of obscure hobby items from the deepest corners of online retailers. And as an early Christmas gift to myself this year, I decided to order them all so we can open them together and determine what's gold and what's garbage. You know, I think my problem with buying all sorts of weird hobby gear online is that I started doing it and found a couple of really valuable things, like the Wow Stick pen drill, and I'll put a link up to that video if you want to check it out. I guess it's a lot like fishing. I'm just going to keep tossing lines and eventually I'll catch a big one, hopefully. Or waste a bunch of money on stuff I'll never use, but at least then you won't make the same mistake. All right, first thing in the box here is ultra fine chain. Now, you can just go to your local craft or jewelry store and get some cheap chain there, but this stuff is 0.6 millimeters, meaning I was thinking it was going to be much more to scale with our miniatures. So let's open it up and find out. All right, I'm gonna have to take my glasses off to even see this stuff. It is so tiny. This stuff is so much smaller than any chain that I've found at a jewelry store, and you're gonna kind of pay for that size. It's about $10, I think maybe $12 for 30 centimeters in length of this tiny chain. But as I'm holding it up to Warhammer models, this stuff actually feels in scale. It's almost like you can sculpt on extra chains on all your gnarly models whenever you want it. Like a lot of the hobby items I find these days, this stuff is made for scale modeling. And that means they often give you a lot of options in different sizes for different scales. So you can check out which size chain you want to use. Maybe it'd be a larger one for a vehicle, or something small like this would be perfect for all your Space Marines. Now the next item looks like it'd be something you'd find in your local doctor's office, but it's actually just titled an ink mixer. And this thing kind of caught my attention because while we do have different sources of mixing our paints, like the lab mixer that I use, sometimes when things get really stuck to the bottom, sometimes the pigments just can't be lifted free by regular agitation. I thought something like this might do the trick. Now you may notice what I'm seeing here is that these sticks themselves are not super long, meaning they should fit into a Games Workshop pot of paint, but they're not going to be long enough to fit in the inside of the average bottle of paint. But I do have a couple of GW pots of paint here that are quite separated, and they're not even that old because it's so inconvenient and so much time is going to be spent just to get this thing in this pot to look okay. Now, I will say that I can see one great use for this thing, and that would be if you have any of the old GW paints. Back when I did a video on trying to resurrect the old paints, having this thing would have probably gone so far in resurrecting old chunky paints. And yeah, I think this thing was like 15 bucks too. So if I had 15 bucks to spend on a new hobby tool, I don't think that this would be the thing that I chose to spend my bucks on. When I pulled this one out of the box, I forgot what it was. It just kind of looks like a couple of pieces of metal. And I think this is supposed to be a very exact hobby saw. It looks like it's made from really thin tin, which means it may not hold up super well, but I think we just attach it to the handle of one of my blades here and we'll try it out. And like most stuff in this box, this thing doesn't come with any instructions, so we'll see if I'm smarter than the Chinese tin saw thing or not. Okay, 20 minutes of work later, we have a saw. This thing damn well better cut well, or I'm gonna be mad. All right, I've got a bit that typically would be a pain in the butt to cut through, so let's see if we can get a nice, clean, narrow cut with this thing. Okay, this actually isn't too bad. I own 3 other small saws, and this is definitely the thinnest blade of any of them that I have, and it doesn't give a lot back and forth. I often find that they bend, and you can actually just kind of ruin a saw from being straight because the metal that they're made of is so flimsy. Like any of these tiny saws, this isn't going to be great on curves, but if you need a nice clean cut without too much waste of your plastic or resin on either side, I kind of dig this thing, and I think I will keep using it. Next thing out of the box looks like an old computer mouse from the 90s. Can you guess what this little product would be used for? What it is, and I would have never guessed this just by looking at it, is a hobby desk vacuum cleaner. It allows you to pick up all the dust and debris on your desk without sucking up anything big or anything important that you don't want to lose. So what I'm going to do is a little trial run here. I've got 3 different kinds of things. I've got sand, we'll put some of that on the desk, coconut fibers here that are going to be a little bit more irregular, but we'll kind of sprinkle that in big and small chunks. Lastly, I have my smashed up tile slate. If you've never gone to your local hardware store and picked up a single slate tile that you could smash up and use as 2-scale rocks for your minis, here's your friendly reminder to do so. We're going to get some smaller ones out there. I'm not going to put the bigger ones because those I would just pick up by hand anyway. All right, just turn it on. See if it works. Now it does seem that some of the very small particles are pushed out the air filters on the side here, but this thing is actually quite powerful and it doesn't have a lack of control like a lot of the hand vacuums that you can use just around your house seem to have. And when you're ready to empty the thing out or you accidentally scooped up a bit that you needed, you can just open the bottom here and you've got the whole access to what's inside, dump that in the garbage and pick out any of your long lost bits that you forgot where they were. I got to admit, I was just assuming this thing was going to be a joke, but I think I'm going to keep it on my desk and use it as my regular vacuum for my hobby station. Next up, I wanted to buy a large amount of 2-scale bricks that I could use for cobblestone streets or for dioramas or any kind of basing. And this was another reminder to myself that I don't exactly understand how scales work in model building, so the bricks that I bought were much bigger. Let's forget about this little mistake, shall we? Next up is probably the thing that excited me the most, I thought had the most potential to be something really valuable. And it's just this weird little pen thing right here. Now, this is a portable electric grinder, but if paired with what I have in here, sponge sanding discs, may entirely change how I clean my models. At least that's the hope. We're going to find out if it's true or not. If you did want to pick up any of the stuff I'm testing today, I'll put links down in the video description so you can grab anything that catches your fancy. I grabbed a couple of bits here with pretty noticeable mold lines, but very typical for plastic kits. Let's take the sander to them and see if it does its job. All right, this thing has 3 speeds, but trust me, you're just going to want to use the lowest one. All right, with 1,000 grit sandpaper on the attached head, I think this thing is pretty damn awesome. With the high grit sandpaper, it'll sand down just the mold lines, and you can control this thing as it really fits in your hand nicely like a pen. The only downside is I just recommend the 1,000 grit sandpaper on this. If you go lower, you're gonna start grinding into the actual details on the model. So this thing does excite me. With just using 1,000 grit and just a couple minutes of messing with it, I can see the value here. Shirts. You know who has them? Well, pretty much everybody on the planet, I guess. But where should you get your shirts? Well, today's sponsor, Into the AM, of course. Listen, I've already told you that their zip-up hoodie is my favorite of the 24 or so hoodies I own. Which reminds me, I need to place that order for 4 more. But they also have a bunch of new graphic tees that are really my jam. Their range of skull and Japanese-inspired themes feel like they were tailor-made for me, and they have a load of other styles to choose from as well. Feels like every time I check out their website, they have a bunch of sweet new options, which means I'm finally retiring some of those t-shirts from high school. As always, whether it's hoodies, flannels, basic tees, or graphics, the quality is top-notch and they are incredibly soft and comfortable. So make sure you check out the link down in the video description to see all that Into the AM has to offer. And as always, they have some great bundle deal pricing. Plus, you can always use my code that's on the screen right now to get another 10% off any order, anytime. Thanks, Into the AM. Now back to the video. Back to more 2-scale stuff. This time I have metal mesh. That's right, this is just like chain link fence or mesh of some kind, but 2-scale. There's a really interesting feel to it. It has a roughness, like you could shape this because it's actual tiny, tiny threads of metal. And I think that's pretty cool, is you wanted to maybe sculpt a torn off piece of fence or something like that. This you could actually do that with. This exact scale is so tiny that it might actually be too fine to actually even see the individual links of chain on this. Although I gotta feel there's something like this at like a fabric store or a craft store or something that's used for something completely different. Oh dude, you could cut this stuff out, put it over the shoulder pads of a Space Marine, and it'll have a cool texture because this stuff is gonna mold to the shape and still be kind of firm. Next thing up is a little tiny guide. Now this has got pilot holes already to allow you to center something and drill, because I don't know about you, but whenever I'm drilling into a model to try to either get a spot in a pin to connect two pieces or just trying to get an exact hole, I often feel like the drill itself will kind of slide one way or another across the surface of the model and make it so my exact hole isn't exactly where I want it to be. And while I'm drilling with this guide, I can't actually see around the rest of the model because this guide is obscuring my view, meaning I can't see if I'm drilling in at a straight angle or I need to correct as I'm going. So this feels like it's going to be more hurt than help. Okay, the hole I drilled on the back of his foot isn't even centered. All right, next up we have rigging for scale models. This is 0.1 millimeter thickness rigging for ships. This looks like it's used for the lines in little model airplanes as well. And per usual, when I was looking at different products that I could get variety of sizes for, I tended to just buy the smallest one, assuming that for our tiny scale, the smallest is probably best. I feel like if there was a very specific purpose that you wanted a very fine thread, this stuff seems very workable. You can tie it into knots. You could cut it and super glue it quickly if you wanted to. You can give a nice taut feel. I know a lot of times when I've worked with other materials, they end up feeling like they have a little bit of a bow to them. But this stuff, you can get a real taut bowstring for it, which would be great. Final stretch, just a couple more to go, and I'm saving the best for last. But before that one, there's this. These are these tiny little files. They look like carbon fiber files, and they're super, super thin, a couple of them, so you can really get into the most tight spots on your models as you're cleaning them up. I made the mistake of assuming that these things already had a grip on them, just like a miniature file here. I thought that that's what they were, but they don't. They're just super smooth. And what they tell you to do is to buy a self-adhesive sandpaper and put that on here and then use these to sand. So I already spent the money, so I thought I'd go spend more money and buy some self-adhesive sanding discs and just cut out little bits, put them on here. This thing is more like using the flexible sanding sticks that I love so much in my model cleanup. But because this thing has a nice sharp corner to it, I can really get into the cracks and crevices and the nice straight edges that oftentimes we find our mold lines falling into. Do I think these specific little carbon fiber looking things are the reason why this works well? No, it's just the fact that we have self-adhesive thin sandpaper that I can then put on any small little metal thing like this and then control my sanding, and I can use the right size sandpaper grit that I like to for cleaning models. So yeah, the real victor for today is surprisingly self-adhesive sandpaper, and then something tiny and strong like these little metal files that you can stick it to. All right, the last product I bought is obviously the meme of the day, and that is this thing that looks like a water dish that you set out for your dog or your cat so they can drink water all the time when you're not home, but it's actually for cleaning your paintbrush. It's a lot smaller than I pictured it in my head. I guess I've seen too many of the dog water dishes and kind of just assumed it was that size. But actually this smaller size is nicer because it feels like a little bit more viable at our painting desk. Now in theory, the point of this thing is that you're never working with contaminated dirty water as you're rinsing out your paintbrush. You just rinse it in this little spot right here, and then you can flush it down. New water will come to it, and then every time you're washing out your brush, it's with clean, clear water. Now it says we have to lean this back as we are turning this on. Oh, do it quick. Okay, we're there. I did spill a couple of drops, but I think that was mostly because I was trying to talk to you and flip it at the same time, and I realized there was a point of no return there where I either had to back off or keep going, and I just kept going. Now, I don't know about you, but I oftentimes just keep my same water cup at my desk for days or weeks or sometimes a month or more at a time, and it's super dirty and gross. But that doesn't mean it's good practice to do that, and maybe this will help in some way. Let's start by using a real vibrant contrast paint, and we'll just slosh it in there like that. Contaminate all of that water. Oh, look, it's not moving back up there, although it's trying. Let's try to flush the toilet. Now you can see there is still some residual pink color. Now that was a really vibrant paint. Maybe if I flush it again, it'll go away. Yeah, it is gone. That's pretty cool. And there's these nice little ribs on the side of this to kind of get out any paint that's stuck deeper on the brush as you are rinsing it out. So that's pretty nice. Honestly, this is not a terrible thing, just at first glance. I think there's some potential here. I like how it's very easy to get perfectly clean water every time you're painting. If you want your brush to be clean, boom, you're set. Also, going back and forth between painting metallics and painting regular paints, there's often this worry that you're going to contaminate your rinsing water with the metallic flakes. Well, with this, that water is flushed, and you can go back and forth much easier. So there might be some value in that. Do I think this thing's absolutely necessary? No. Do I think it has potential to be somewhat valuable enough to where I'm going to test it upcoming in some regular paint sessions? Yeah, because it doesn't take up a ton of real estate on my desk like I kind of expected it would, and it just seems to be valuable enough to have a nice clean clear water whenever I need it. I can't believe I'm saying this thing might actually be good. They're also not all that expensive, but it's likely that your friends will make fun of you for having one, so kind of weigh the pros and cons of that. With that, I am done opening all the Christmas hobby gifts to myself for the year. I think that there's a couple of things here that are quite promising, some things that are going to make their way into my regular hobby rotation. Let me know below if any of these things seem interesting to you or if you've tried any of them before yourselves. I hope you have a wonderful holiday season, and a sincere thank you from me to you for hanging out with me in my videos throughout the last year, and I'm very excited for the new videos to come in 2024. All your support through the Patreon, through buying your miniature products using the links below, picking up your Ninjon merch, or maybe even just subscribing to the channel means so much to me, and I can't thank you enough. And I'm going to be back here again real soon with another video. Don't worry, there'll be more before the end of the year. And sometime between now and that next video, make sure you find time in your day to slay the gray.